Well, we're live. Hi, all. I'm Ryan, and I'm joined by Kevin McCoy. I'm a freelance sound designer, system engineer, and audio engineer. And then Kevin, an audio engineer also, and currently the head audio of Hamilton, San Francisco. You may have seen him in many famous titles, such as Adam Savage's lovely tested video about his
Okay.
mixing. No?
Okay. Yes. Hello.
All right, so today we're going to do, as you know, a webinar about mic rigging. Uh, I probably expect it to be just under 2 hours long. Um, and yeah, we have a variety of topics. They're
Two
all,
hours? I did not sign up for this.
well,
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Keep going.
yeah, there's definitely going to be a lot in here, for sure. So hang with us, but it's all going to be really useful information. As we go through, there's going to be multiple different stopping points where we'll try to answer questions after each section. So if you have any questions, please just post them in the chat, and then we'll get to them at the next stopping point. If you have anything that's super unrelated to whatever we're doing, if you could just hold that for the end, and then we'll take a long pause at the very end and answer all of those. All right, let's get this thing going. So,
All right.
first, what we're covering. So, we're going to start with transmitters, covering sizing and placement, and then we're going to go on to different placements of mic elements and common manufacturers, and then different models from each manufacturer, how we color them, paint, marker, all that fun stuff, and then how to build microphone rigs specifically to affix them in those placements that we will talk about a little earlier. And then we'll talk about some different brands of tape, and then last but not least, everyone's favorite, sweat outs. Okay. So, first we got transmitters. So these are some common transmitters that you'll see, and there are obviously some others. But on the left side we have three very common in the Broadway world, which is a Sennheiser 5212, a Sennheiser 6212, which is new and fancy, and only a few shows have at the moment, and then Shure Axient Digital, which is also another new and fancy thing that I think only one show currently has. And we're sort of doing this to show the difference between a full size, which is like a Shure ULXD, and then some of the micro pack options. A lot of times, a lot of companies, specifically educational, will only have the full size ones to work with. I know a lot of times that's all I have to work with, but we'll go through some of the placements, and you can see how the different sizes sort of affect those different placement options. All right, so the first sort of placement, and one of the probably the most common, is in a mic belt on the back, sort of in that sort of swell of the back. This is super common, comfortable for most things, but depending on how the belt's made, can sort of flop around sometimes, which shows with intense dance. If they're particularly bulky packs or belts, they can sort of show up in clothing, which costume designers don't really like. And then sometimes, depending on your placement, people won't like the look of the cables running down the back of their necks, or that could create an issue. Or if it's like a scene in which someone doesn't have a shirt on, it could also create an issue going on their back in a belt. So this is a very common placement and works for a lot of different shows, but isn't always the option chosen. There are a lot of different manufacturers that make these packs that we're going to talk about. This one in the picture is made by Neopax. I've personally never used Neopax ones. Wireless mic belts is a very common choice. And then Shure also has some that they make specifically for their transmitters. And then also a lot of different wardrobe departments will custom make their own for a show. It just all depends. All right, so next is a shoulder blades placement. This is, instead of a belt with a pouch, a harness with a pouch, and it goes over the two shoulders and holds it right in between the shoulder blades, and is a lot more secure, definitely, for for shows with more dance. But just like the swell and actually more, can still show up in clothing, and you still have a cable running down the back of the neck. So this is great for a lot of shows, but just like with the belt placement, can create some issues depending. Okay, and then we got wig. This is a super common placement, especially for Broadway shows, because they're really easy to conceal in a production with a lot of wigs, like most Broadway productions are. But sometimes people aren't wearing wigs, which obviously doesn't make this an option. And then if you don't have the micro packs, like the ones that are shown in the pictures here, that could create problems because you can't fit those full-size packs in wigs a lot of times. So there's definitely some things to keep in mind. And
You also definitely, when there's two transmitters, especially, the wig designer has to like know about it ahead of time, because they really have to leave a lot of room in the wig for this to work out.
yeah, definitely the deciding if you're going to have mics in the wig or not before wig fittings is extremely important, because they can definitely interfere with the wig just getting on their head. Yeah. And then also, last note is that you really can't get to them really easily once they're under a wig. So for a lot of times when they're under a wig, you'll do two, or you'll just do one, and you'll have to deal with getting to that if a thing was to ever happen. A note here about shorter elements being available. You can see in this picture that they have just a normal length element sort of coiled up, and in some later pictures you'll see what a shorter element in that position would look like, often ordered to, instead of the normal 5-6 foot length, and 18 or 22 inches, which just keep them shorter so that you don't have as much slack coiled up and going in the wig. But it all depends on the resources and the time for that production. This one's from I think from Grease Live or Hairspray Live. So yeah. Next is sewn in. This is a great placement. It's just as secure as a harness, and oftentimes allows the costume department to conceal it more. This one is sewn on the back of a corset just for demonstration, but a lot of times they'll end up getting sewn inside. And different manufacturers sell, like Wireless Mic Belt sells a specific pouch that's got fabric that allows you to sew it in really well, and secure and hidden, and great transmitter placement. Next, the side of the torso. Unfortunately, I couldn't get a picture of this, but under sort of under the armpit, a few inches down, is another common placement that can help a lot if there's acrobatics, people flying like in Bring It On. That can definitely help conceal there and not take the risk of the pack being crushed when someone's being caught, or the pack being the pack being damaged, or the person being damaged from that pack getting pushed into them. So that's definitely useful. And then lastly, the center of the chest. This is also another great placement for shows with acrobatics going on, and that can be in a pouch sewn into a costume, or that can be clipped onto a bra, it shoved into a leotard. There's some good options for that, and those can both be really good placements for when there's a lot of acrobatics going on. And inside of the thigh, this one is not one that I do often. I don't think I've done it more than maybe once, if that. But definitely good placement to know. That can also be useful for things with acrobatics, because it's hidden and won't get in the way of tumbling, but could be sort of uncomfortable at times, so people may stray away from it. Most standard mic elements lengths will reach down to that. But depending on your manufacturer, you may have to order an extra long element. And as I said, they can be a little uncomfortable when they're down there on the inside of your thigh, but definitely a good option to have in the book. Ankle. This is something that I've never done for theater, but is really common in TV to put the element down on the ankle. When you have a shot that's only framing the upper half of your body, it's really easy to keep this out of the shot and not have it interfere with clothing or anything. So yeah, you'll need to definitely order an element with a longer cable, or if you have like a DPA element, you can get extension cables that allow you to make this placement happen. But usually when they're done on the ankle, they end up exposed, and yeah, so really common in TV, not really used in theater. All right, first sort of stop.
So, yeah, and so just like a couple things that I would say about all those placements and stuff is one thing to really watch out for is watching out how the antenna is being affected by the placement of the pack. You want to make sure that that the antenna isn't being bent over or crushed. It really wants to be as straight and as free as possible. Also, that you also want to watch out for how the connector for the element is being affected. Like you want to try and take as much stress off of that as possible. So those are definitely things to watch for as you're placing the pack. Also, other things to look out for are sort of like understanding what the risks and rewards are of in terms of sweat. Like the small of the back is a great location in a lot of ways, but it can also be a collection point for sweat. So you have to just kind of be aware of that as you're doing it. When I did the Memphis First National Tour, we did a lot of packs in the small of the back, and that worked out really well, even for a fair bit of tumbling that we had in the show. So that's like definitely a high usability place. We also had put all of our women's packs in their wigs because all the women were in wigs, and so it gave us a good location there. Another solution to the problem with the wigs, of course, like Ryan said, is that once it's in the wig, it's hard to troubleshoot in mid-show. Sometimes you'll have a little bit of time, and the wig department can help you get them out of their wig real quick and fix it. Another option is to have an emergency mic ready. If you have the resources to have a spare transmitter and element, and have an emergency one ready with either a halo that can go over the wig real quick, and we'll talk about the halo in a little bit, or just like a clip that can go on real quick, just as an emergency to get through a song or two until you can properly fix the mic. There's a couple questions, Ryan. I don't know if you're looking at the chat right now, but
yeah.
One question is, what's the average range of transmitters if there is one? I'll just say that it depends a lot on like how you set up your antenna system and what transmitters you're using and that sort of stuff. There's a lot of really good RF webinars going on right now, and so if you really want to think about that sort of thing a lot, there's some great RF webinars. I highly recommend practicalshowtech.com. Right now they're doing fantastic webinars about proper RF management. But in general, if you have a good antenna setup in your theater, your transmitters should reach the entire inside of your theater. But the closer you can get your antennas to the stage, the better. So if you have your wireless microphone receivers out front of house with the mixing board, and you have just the little whip antennas out front, sometimes you might get a little interference. So you'd be better off getting the receivers on stage. Yeah, Ryan,
yeah,
you agree with that?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. The big thing that sort of stumps a lot of lower level, lower budget theater productions is the receivers going at front of house. That definitely can create range issues depending on the exact setup that you're using. So definitely trying to get the receivers closer to the stage can help with that. And it can also help with being able to monitor, especially when people are in backstage areas. Putting the receivers backstage can get you better reception for that as well. Another question that we have here was about antennas, and specifically the antennas on the transmitters, and what the best orientation for that is. A lot of times, there's not really anything that goes with any specific system, I don't think. Different systems at different levels will have hard antennas or softer antennas. Like on a ULXD, those have very hard antennas, but on a ULX, they're softer antennas. So you definitely want to make sure that you're keeping those antennas straight. Some some higher end systems, like for the Sennheiser 6000 series, I know has this, that you can get an antenna that's completely flexible or one that's harder. The only reason that manufacturers really make them hard is so that they will stay either straight up or straight down or sometimes sideways, and that's the real reason that they're made harder. So if you have a pack with a softer antenna, definitely make sure that you're doing what you can do to keep that as vertical, well, not necessarily vertical, but just as straight as possible. I know that they created some issues when certain shows got the new 6212s with the soft antennas and just sort of rolled them up and shoved them in the pouch, because it's definitely important that that antenna is staying straight. Yeah.
Yeah, and then one more question about from Mr. A to Z. Any thoughts on mic placement for heavy stage combat shows? Like, I guess it would definitely depend on sort of what the stage combat consists of. Like, if there's a lot of like falling and that sort of stuff, like there's going to be trade-offs, right? So, like I said, we put the mics in belts on the small of the back a lot for Memphis, and there was a lot of rolling around on that show, and we didn't have any issues. But so I guess I would start. That's kind of my default placement, either that or wigs, and I would sort of start there. But if you see that there's a ton of like falling on the back, then maybe start looking at inside of the thigh, that sort of thing. It's definitely going to depend on the specific kind of combat.
Yeah. Another question was cloth, elastic, or neoprene belts. We talk more about the different properties of those later. Our preference over all of them would probably be neoprene, and I think I'll hold off now because there's a good few slides that talk about that towards the end.
Yeah. And in terms of the belt itself, like ignoring sort of the properties of the pouch, just like something stretchy, definitely, like as opposed to a cloth.
Yeah.
But then the pouch itself, we'll talk about the pouches a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Jonathan asked sort of a follow-up about the antennas. Would taping the antenna in place work? Like, you can, but I don't know that it's not often an issue. I would just say that if you're finding that one actor in particular is sort of dropping out a lot, like losing RF reception a lot, take a look. Just keep in mind that bending the antenna can be a cause of that, and so take a look at their transmitter placement and see if that could be causing it. And I guess if you need to tape the antenna in place, that's an option, but I would definitely use that as like a later resort. I would rather try and get the transmitter in a position that doesn't bend the antenna in the first place.
Yeah, I put a lot of emphasis on that as well, but I mean, the things do not need to stay 100% perfectly straight, but they also cannot be curled up into a little ball and shoved into the pouch with the microphone.
And it's something that you can look at yourself. Take a transmitter and go a little ways away from the antenna, so you're not overloading the antenna, or you're not blasting the antenna. But look at the signal meter on the receiver, and then bend the antenna carefully. Don't break it, but if it's one of the flexible ones, bend it a little bit, and you'll see the signal meter drop, and that gives you an idea of the sort of thing that happens in practical use.
Yeah. All right.
And then one more question here. Do certain clothing / set materials affect the quality and or sound of the transmitters? Go ahead, Ryan.
There's sort of two ways that I think about answering this question. So the first is clothing on the actor that's maybe over the element, and then the second is physical set pieces that the transmitters are having to go through. So I think that most times that you'll find that set pieces will not necessarily affect the sound in terms of like fidelity of the audio spectrum, but they can cause interference due to, well, they can cause lower reception, which can sound very similar to interference, and they can cause dropouts, which is something that we could talk about more. But I think that would be better answered by one of those RF webinars. In terms of sound of certain clothing pieces affecting microphones, definitely that can have a big effect if the microphone is under something. So a lot of times you'll see microphones getting held down, like say if they're on the forehead, which we talk more about placement in a second, by like wig lace. And usually wig lace isn't a problem, but if you find yourself, a lot of times what'll happen during a show is say a microphone slips under a hat, and that microphone element slipping under the hat can have a big effect on how that sounds. And we're actually going to talk about a few ways that are pretty common for addressing when a microphone, say, falls under a hat. So, does that answer the question well?
Yeah, and then just a few other little follow-ups. I've definitely worked on shows. I feel like on Motown we had a dress that had a lot of shimmery, metally bits in it, and we definitely had reception issues with that dress, and so we had to work on that. Also, I did a theatrical circus where the one of the actors was wearing sort of like a dress that had a bunch of metal rings around her. That was definitely a challenge for RF. So there are certain ways that sort of more interesting costumes can affect RF, and it's hard to predict. Just you sort of have to like see it in the moment and figure out a better placement once you see that it's a problem.
Yeah.
And then the other thing to mention is, if you're on a show that's using, I mean, more and more LED walls are becoming commonplace in all levels of theater, and LED walls are notorious for putting out a ton of RF noise. So that's just something to be aware of, that if you have actors that are going behind an LED wall, or if there's an LED wall between the actor and the receivers, that's a high interference sort of situation for those transmitters, and that probably requires that's a more in-depth discussion about how to address that sort of stuff. But it's definitely something to watch out for, as well as depending on know your scenery construction. If it's a bunch of 2x4s and plywood, it's going to be less problematic than tube steel with welded legs and stuff. So
yeah, I think we can try to find another webinar that addresses some RF stuff a little bit more, and maybe
I'll put one in the chat.
Great.
Yeah.
All right. Next, element placements, and this will go with the audio quality of different placements of microphones, and how that can affect how it sounds as opposed to RF reception. So first, and probably the most common that I've seen in theater and that I've used in theater is forehead placement. So here you see a lovely photo of Neil Patrick Harris with the mic right in his hairline. So start a couple common ways to fix this are Toupee Clips, halos, and then them being clipped in under wigs. We'll talk more about that a bit later. And in terms of getting it to sound how you need it to, and to get the level out of it you need, the general rule is the lower the mic goes on the forehead, the greater your gain before feedback will be. So some shows, and this is also an artistic thing, you'll see the microphones all the way up at the hairline. And then other shows, they'll be dotted in between the eyebrows. So it all depends on what the sound designer and the costumes and the director and all of that decide for a given show. It really depends. So another thing to keep in mind with this, especially when you have them up closer to the hairline, is that they can be covered really easily with hats or headpieces. Or even if they're under a hat, the sound of the stuff of the audio reflecting, or well, not the audio, but the voice reflecting off of the brim of a hat can have a big impact in how that microphone sounds. So a lot of times, either when mics are covered or just for the audio impact, there will be another mic placed in the hat, which we'll talk about in a second here. And then there's also another placement that will help with the sound of hats that we'll talk about as well. So here are some more pictures and examples. So here we have two double microphone setups with a main and a backup microphone for leads on a given show. And then a single microphone here. See, there's sort of two tactics that they've gone with for this double miking on the forehead. Hers are just both sort of together and in the center of her forehead. And you can see how there's a Hellerman sleeve holding them together. More on that later. And then here, you can see how they sort of spread them apart and put one on either side of the head. And one of them is also a little lower than the other. And I would guess, and sometimes you see this, that the primary microphone is lower than the backup microphone, like in this case. I would bet that that lower microphone is the primary microphone as opposed to the backup, which would be a little higher. So, all good things to keep in mind. All right, so ear rig. So this is one of the next tactics for addressing that hat sound. So specifically the ear placement as opposed to the rig, which we'll talk about later, has the microphone ending up sort of on the side of the cheek here or up in the sideburn. And then depending on how long you build the rig, which you can build it as long as you decide that you need to for a production, that will give you more or less gain before feedback and more or less concealment. So sometimes you'll see this ear placement achieved with something like an ear rig. And then sometimes you'll just see a mic taped onto the side of a face. That's something that's all too common in educational theater. That's why we really want to show you guys how to build these ear rigs. So
we oppose that.
Yes.
Please don't tape your mics to the sides of your face. If you can avoid it. I mean, sometimes you got to do it, but please don't do it.
Yeah. So this ear placement is very common, and it has some different audio qualities than a forehead placement, and doesn't usually sound quite as good. But we'll talk about some ways of addressing that later. But it does not subside or words, but it is not affected as much by that hats coming on and off as a forehead mic would be. So this all comes down to decisions of the designer and such. Next would be headsets. Headsets are a purchasable item that gets the mic out a lot farther towards the mouth, usually up in the corner of the mouth when a big smile is made. And these can be really useful because getting the mic closer to the mouth gives you more gain before feedback, first off. And it also gives the most direct sound because you're the closest as opposed to being 4 or 5 inches away on the forehead or up at the ear. So it can be useful for louder shows a lot where that more direct sound will help a mic cut through, and also where you just need more gain before feedback to get that microphone loud enough. A lot of issues that people run into when using headsets is the headset getting too close to the mouth, or a combination of it being too close and it being a directional headset, which causes plosives or breathing noise to be picked up from the nose and the mouth, actually. So that's definitely something to keep in mind and watch out for.
With almost all of the headsets that I've ever used, sort of the target location is, like we like to say, the corner of the smile. So when someone is smiling, you want to put it right almost where the corner of their lips is. That keeps it. Oh yeah, there's my camera. Keeps it just out of getting the plosives and the nose breathing sound.
Yeah. So yeah, another thing to note is that headsets often come in single or double ear. Someone mentioned Countryman E6s. Those are really common and on the more affordable side of headsets that are a single ear. We'll talk more about different manufacturers and what they make, single and double ear wise. Yeah. Glasses. This is personally one of my favorite placements. I don't know why. I just really like it. And they can be really well concealed and get you on while also getting the mic lower. But of course, the person has to be wearing glasses all show long if you're going to use a glasses rig. So yeah, there are upsides and downsides to it. Here, you can see both of these rigs have 2 microphones. It's sort of hard to see the one over on this side in the second picture. But if you need a main and backup, you can just go on either side of the glasses. And yeah, they also have the advantage of no tape on face being required because they just hang down from the glasses. Yeah. Hats, crowns, and other headwear. So this is a common solution, both for shows where someone may be wearing a crown all show long, like in this show, this is Spamalot, so King Arthur, and is wearing a hat all show long, and also the knights who say knee will wear crowns, and these microphone positions are really really important for getting both the sound that you need. Well, mostly just getting the sound that you need. So yeah, they're really great sometimes because the transmitters sort of hide up in the crown or the headpiece, and the mics stick down, so they can be very concealed. Another time that this is useful is when you have a headpiece that's going on that covers the primary microphones attached to someone's head. Like I know, for example, in Kevin's production, they have, for one of the kings, when he puts on his crown, there's an extra mic in that so that they can pick him up when he covers up his main mics with the crown.
Yeah, definitely. For Hamilton, there's a microphone in the crown, and that's really the main mic for the king through the whole show. There's also actually a moment in the second act where Philip Hamilton, Alexander Hamilton's son, comes out and he does a song. And anyway, he comes out and he's wearing like a tricorner, and it covers his normal microphone. So he does the first verse of that.
Common in theater, but you'll see them a lot in corporate and lectures and all that stuff. They're really easy to put on. Well, it should really be called a lapel mic. They're really easy to put on the lapel of a jacket or in a similar placement on a shirt. But they're not great for theater because they don't work with lots of movement really well, nor do you get a lot of gain before feedback after them. So important things to keep in mind. And then also that as someone turns their head, their mouth's getting farther or closer to that microphone, so that can definitely affect the sound of that microphone. All right, take a listen. So there's was a great research done by UNCSA, which is also the school that I attend, and they do both, and they have both recordings of different placements and with different microphones. So they have a great website set up, and I actually haven't put the link in the description yet, but there will be a link in the description for going and taking a listen to that. So there's a great website set up, and you can listen to all different makes and models of microphones and different placements. All right. Let's take some time for some questions.
Yeah, John W. was asking about using Countryman E6. They ask, would you prefer using those or making your own? And then also ask about if there's particular models that have been found to be more durable and they've had a problem with breakage on the pre-molded. So I'll start by answering, and then I'm going to turn it over to Ryan because I think Ryan's used a lot more different kinds of microphones than I have. Headset microphones are hard to build on your own. I've used pre-made headsets and modified them. On the Memphis tour, we used a DPA 4065, I think is their headset, or 4066. 4066.
Yeah, it's 4066.
Yeah, it's their 2-ear headset. So it's a headband that goes over both ears and goes around the back of your neck, and then it has a boom that comes down. And we actually used that boom, but we tied another microphone to it to use it as a dual rig for our lead character. So I've modified headsets, but making headsets, especially dual ear headsets, I've never really seen a lot of homemade ones. They're kind of a pain to make. So I don't know that I would recommend making them. And then as far as which ones to use, I'll turn that over to Ryan because I've really only used those DPAs, the 4066s.
Yes, so there are some... once I'm just putting that information in the description here. It looks like it didn't copy and paste the links quite right, so I'll have to go in and put in those
We'll get it in there
after. But yeah, there are some more affordable microphones than E6s, but in terms of durability versus sound ratio, the E6 sort of falls in a nice spot. However, I wouldn't really, to get a similar placement. Sorry, my thought train's all over the place on this one. To get a similar placement to the E6, I wouldn't recommend building one. In terms of getting a microphone out that close to the mouth, the E6 is one of the better options. Yeah, there are some more durable, more expensive options. Like for sure, a DPA anything is more durable than a 4066, and that really, or sorry, than a E6, and that comes down to where the connection is, in that there's not a connection at the back of the ear there that's having to take all that stress. But you also find that in a 4066, because it's a hard termination at the back of the head there where the boom goes to the cable, once that breaks, you're sort of SOL. So there are upsides and downsides to having that connection for sure. A thing that you can do to sort of stabilize that is put a Hellerman sleeve, which is something that we'll show you in a minute, on that connection there, and that can provide some stability to keep that from moving around and to just keep it from coming disconnected during shows.
And then, Ryan, have you used the Stephanie Swenson asks about the Samson SE50? Are you familiar with that?
I'm not familiar with. Actually, I am familiar with SE50s. Those have.
Stephanie's saying that they can't seem to keep them on the actors without taping to the face.
Yeah, so I can show you some taping and bending techniques at the end that will help with that. Unfortunately, I don't have one of those Samson specifically, but I can translate some of the methods from the other microphones that I have to help you with holding those on. Because we definitely like to avoid taping on face because of just how it looks. It just doesn't look great. And so, yeah, we'll definitely show you some methods with that. I believe, if I remember right, the SE50s, while they don't sound as good as the E6s, have a screw connection at the back of the ear for that detachable cable, which that screw-type connection can be really nice in terms of keeping that more rock solid. However, they have these like mini jack to whatever connector adapters that can be not as robust. So that's definitely two things to keep in mind for more affordable microphones. I found that,
and Stephanie, also just like one quick thing, and I think Ryan will show you way better options. But one, just like the simplest, easiest first step is always to tape the cable at the back of the neck, which just drastically reduces all the possible movement being translated up to the headpiece itself. And then Ryan will have better tips beyond that.
Yeah, so there's some pictures later on that will show this taping at the back of the neck, and then I'll try at the very end. You may have to remind me. I have actually a broken similar ear set microphone sitting on my desk waiting to get fixed, so I will use that to show some taping techniques for those headsets at the end. Yeah.
And so Dogs Eat Chocolate and Vicky Palmer were both asking about just sort of headset placement and why we don't like taping to the face. Headsets in general should, my experience with headsets has always been, as much as possible, the headset should be as close to the face and follow the contour of the face as possible without touching the face, because if it touches the face, not only do you get sound from rubbing against the skin, but it also increases your risk of sweat getting in the element. We'll talk about sweat, in another section, but that's definitely a way to prevent sweat from getting in, is to keep it from touching the face, but get it as close to the face as you can. And so if you're able to really bend the microphone in a gentle way that follows the face curve, you shouldn't have to tape it to the face, because taping to the face looks bad. It pools sweat. It depending on exactly where you tape it to the face, it can sound bad. It's just, I don't know. It's not my favorite.
Yeah, there's some characteristics that go with cheaper microphones too that can make that perfect bend a little harder, and also with single ear headsets that can make that perfect bend a little harder. But so we'll look at that later and talk about that. One last thing to add here would be, once you get that perfect bend, make sure that you're doing what you can to keep that bend that fits the actor's ear, puts it in the right place, all that, because with a lot of the softer, cheaper microphones, or the softer, more expensive microphones, like you can order an E6, for example, in E6 or E6i, which is a lot more flexible, if I remember correctly. So definitely do what you can to make sure that you're keeping that curve so you don't have to redo it every day, and it's in the same placement every show. Um, all right, I think the next would be Jack's question. With when using glasses rig, do you have any special precautions need to be taken to keep the glasses sturdy on their face? I would think the glasses moving around would not create an optimal noise. I think that most of the time glasses stay in place from my experience. I will say that most of the glasses that I've used do have the rubber pads on the back of their ears, which may help some with the movement. Um, I also think that the weight of those cables going down the glasses, and if there's two, they sort of join in the back of the head. But if there's not, same thing. Sort of holds the glasses on to a degree. I don't know, but I've never had an issue with them moving around or creating noises. It's always been
Yeah,
fun for
and
me.
like even if the glasses move a tiny bit, the microphone is only going to you're not going to hear any rubbing noises because there's not really any rubbing to make noise, and the microphone's only going to move like a couple of millimeters in relation to the mouth, which is already within the margin of error. So I don't think you're going to hear any serious issues there. I wanted to mention Mr. A to Z mentioned doing that on a production they did. They put a microphone in a hood, like a hoodie, or on a cloak, which seems like a great idea to me. I love that sort of idea. Um, I love clever mic placement. So if you
Yeah.
have a costume or a headpiece or whatever that lends itself to that sort of thing, that's super great. Play with it in tech and listen to all of the possible permutations of how the actor is going to manipulate that headpiece or that costume piece, and make sure that you're not going to be surprised later. But definitely, fun mic placements are great and can make really great sounds. I remember some friends who were working on sort of the early Shrek productions, I think the pre-Broadway and the Broadway, and they talked about sort of the experiments they were doing with trying to figure out mic placement in the nose of the prosthetics on the front of that actor's face, and just sort of like doing a ton of experiments. And I love that sort of stuff. Do all the science you can about listening to mic placements, and do recordings if you can, and do comparative recordings. That's fun stuff, especially for students. If you're a student and you're sort of looking for a project to do that's a little bit out of the ordinary, like maybe do some recordings of weird mic placements and do comparative listening, and sort of see what you like and what you dislike about that sort of stuff.
Yeah, a lot of times, say you may allocate a spare transmitter to a production. Definitely use that during a rehearsal to get a second placement that you can A/B between. It's definitely useful there in a situation where if someone else's mic fails, it may not be as high stakes because you're in a rehearsal. So definitely use those resources to try it out. I think another question that we have is about beard mics, so that if the actor doesn't have hair, do they have to wear a hat for the mic placement, or is it preferred to mic their clothing in this scenario? So if an actor doesn't have hair, the two, if they have no hair, like completely shaven, bald, no beard, the usual choice that I go with is an ear rig, and unfortunately, it just has to be seen a little bit, and that's just the unfortunate truth. However, beard placements fall into the category of fun mic placements, just like glasses and hoods do. So in Aladdin on Broadway, they do a beard placement, and if Kevin McCoy was ever in a show, they could do a beard placement. But
I actually have this beard because I did the tour, the first national tour of Once, and we had some actors with really great beards on that show, and it was just like, oh, I'm going to compete with those actors. But we used beard placements on that show. We clipped lav mics down into beards. I think I had one that was about here, and it's I had two, the father figure and then the Billy the music shop owner, both had beard mics, and we just used clips. We'll talk about the clips and stuff a little bit, but we just used toupee clips and clipped them down into their beard, and it was very easy to color the mic and make it disappear, and it was a great sound. But the risk of using a beard mic, which is also a risk in hairline mics, but it seems to be the worst in beard mics, is it's very easy for uh, I mean, it's really into the sideburn, but it depends on what you want to call the difference between the sideburn and the beard. Says that's to Scott Packman Koenig. But the risk with a beard mic is the little small hairs of the beard of the sideburn can turn up and go into the mic and actually start rubbing against the element, and you hear it. On the once tour when we did that, every actor wore 2 microphones, so we had the redundancy. But that's the risk there. And then, like Ryan said, the other option is just always an ear rig.
Yeah, and then I mean, so there's two different. So because they had full beards at once, they were able to. The beard allowed them to have like a sideburnish placement, but to just get a little closer to the mouth. In Aladdin, because they have like a, is it a goatee? Is that? No, is that it? Okay. So they come up under. I'm not great with my beard terminology.
I'm not a facial hair expert. I just have a beard. Okay. Don't pigeonhole me.
So they come up under the chin and clip in upwards facing at the bottom of the beard. You can see some pictures if you ever go on James Monroe Englehart's Instagram. He's got some pictures of him getting ready where you can see him putting on that microphone. So, yeah. We lost 33 mics between Shrek and Donkey during the run of the show. That is a lot of mics. How long was that run?
And then Daniel Soto wants to know about your glasses photo. Was that a Hellerman sleeve attaching the element to the frame of the glasses?
Yeah, it was. So we had go back a little bit. Yeah, so here is just a Hellerman sleeve, I believe. And then here we do a Hellerman sleeve and a little piece of wire wrapped around the element in a similar way to what you'll see that we do in an ear rig in a little bit. That helps the microphone stay pointed down at the mouth. Unfortunately, I didn't have any better pictures of the rig that we do for this particular show, but yeah, there's some options there for sure.
It's also worth mentioning, and maybe I'll try and get the link at some point, but Adam Savage did a great video years ago when he was sort of going out on tour where he modified a pair of his glasses to contain a microphone in a more sort of hidden way than even in that photo. He actually sort of dremeled out a channel in the earpiece of his glasses and buried a microphone in that. And if you've got a pair of glasses that you're willing to destroy like that, you can really do some fun arts and crafts with that. So don't take the photo that Ryan is showing as gospel. Like this is just an idea. You can certainly do all sorts of ideas. None of this stuff is rules. It's just ideas.
Yeah, and definitely if you have a show that's got a long rehearsal time or a really great props artisan or stuff like that, definitely do what you can to take more steps to concealing your microphones. This particular show is that those pictures were from. It's a 2-week run that's remounted every year, but that was the solution that they decided to go for. The glasses are just thin metal ones, so that's what worked for that. And at one point, they switched from Mickey 2s to Mickey 1s, which made a big difference in how it was concealed. I wasn't ever there when it was Mickey 2s, so I can't speak to that. But yeah, definitely do what you can to work towards them being as concealed as possible. All right. Elements. So here we're going to go through some different common manufacturers. I have a lot of pictures of some of the more common Broadway manufacturers. And then some more affordable ones as well. We'll talk about the first of which, and one of the two what I would call Broadway standards for the last 15-ish years would be a DPA 4060 series. So what's commonly used in theater is a 4061, which is the sensitivity for theater. And we'll talk about microphone sensitivities a little bit more later. And then the 4066, which is the headset version that has the same capsule at the end. And brand new DPA has the 4060, which is a ton smaller. And I'll give you a size reference for that in a bit. 6060. I'm bad at this. So the 6060, which is in theory has an identical sound to the 4060, and in my experience it does as well. Or it does pretty much exactly, but is significantly smaller, even smaller than they look in comparison in these two pictures. So in the same way that there's a 4066 to go with the 4060, there is a 6066 to go with the 6060. so the same capsule on the end. They've made some headband improvements in the 66 to make it more comfortable, and added this little right angle adapter here to make it more streamlined and redirect the cable down the back of the neck, and as well as some more locking features to better lock in the boom. But it all depends. Well, it doesn't all depend. It all depends across manufacturers, but what you can afford. The 6066 is a much more expensive microphone than the 4066, and the 4066 is already a very expensive microphone. DPA also has some 41 series stuff, which is uses a more flexible ear set, and they do make those in a single ear as opposed to only making the 40 and 66s in a double ear. But a lot of times you'll find that while those flexible ear sets can be really comfortable for presentations and stuff, they don't hold on well enough for theater. So definitely things to keep in mind. All right. Next is Sennheiser. So this is the Mickey 1 over here is the other super common sort of Broadway option. So the Mickey 1 and the 4066 have been Broadway staples for years. The Mickey 1 has a larger companion, which is the Mickey 2. They sound different, but they're really for different applications. And then they have headsets versions of both of those called the Speechline 1 and the HSP 2. In terms of the Mickey 1s are really common for forehead microphones. A lot of times because they're small, I feel like we're seeing more of a switch over to those 61 and 66 series, because they have the same sound as the 40 series, which people like, but they're smaller like the Mickey 1. And I don't really see the Speechline 1 or HSP 2s really used at the Broadway level. Usually people will stick to the DPA for that, but it all depends on your designer. Yeah. Next is Countryman. Countryman's are really common and more affordable than those two options, with the two common microphones for theater being the B6 and the B3, and then the headset versions that go with the B6 with the same element, which is the E6 and the H6, which are the same element but with a single ear and dual ear headset respectively. There's also the E6i, which is a more flexible version of the E6. And then in Countryman's other offerings, they have the B2D, which is a directional lavalier microphone, and the EWM, which is a water-resistant microphone. I don't feel like you see those a lot in theater unless there's a really specific application for them. But they are things that they make that can be useful to have in your toolkit. The B3 is sort of a really nice entry-level lavalier mic for a lot of educational theater. It sits in around like $170 quoted to a lot of educational institutions, and offers a great price to sound quality ratio for sure. The next is Point Source. Point Source Audio is a much newer company than either of the three that I showed before, and they're sort of making headway on a lot of productions because their mics are a little bit more water resistant than some of the other options. And that's until DPA came out with the 60 series, which is just about as water resistant as this is. But they're also more affordable than those other options. So some people have started to like how these sound and their water resistance, and have started to put them to work. Point Source also has some interesting things in there that they have double microphones. I've never seen one of these in person. I've seen one at a trade show, but I've never seen one used on a show, on an actual production. But these can be really nifty for certain shows where you want two mics and one cable. And then they also have headsets. I believe that they have some single ear headsets as well. But this double ear headset has the same element end, which is the 8 series built in to the end, as opposed to their single ear options have a different element in the end. And then the 8 series is, as this picture shows, really water resistant. So that's one of the main selling points for it for sure. Yeah. And then last, some other manufacturers worth noting are Shure. I mentioned Twinplex there, which is their new, really fancy element that they're really pushing right now. Although it's a little bit bigger than I think a lot of people wanted to see, so you won't really see it getting used too often, I don't feel. But they also have some more common options that come with their systems, which are like the WL93, which is a super, super common option for when you purchase Shure lower middle range systems. Sorry, I was reading a chat. They can be good, but they also don't usually get you the best audio quality. Shure also has the WL51. Is that what it is, Kevin? The 51? That's an older.
Oh, I don't know.
Okay.
Sorry.
So Shure doesn't make this microphone anymore, but I believe it's a WL51 that they used to make in tan and black. That's a smaller option around the size of a B3, but they don't make it anymore, and it's sort of been, there was a many-year gap in there, but it's been replaced with the Twinplex for sure. Senken makes some mics that are really common.
I'll just say that the only Shure wireless mics I've ever had the opportunity to use were when I worked on family entertainment such as Sesame Street Live. We used oh no, I'm sorry, those are Crown. What am I thinking? I'm talking about Crown mics. Keep going.
Shure also makes some similar sized microphones to those Crown headsets that are like Britney Spears style. But they're not really ready for theater. Shure does have some single ear, like E6 like ear sets that they make that aren't super common, but sometimes you see people getting them because they come with the kits. But yeah. And then Senken makes some mics that are more common on film. I've never really seen them used on theater. I've seen maybe one article about them being used on theater. A lot of times you'll see that they're longer. And the reason that they're longer, and you'll also see this like if you're perusing DPA's website, that they make the 40 series in a longer variant. I believe it's the 40. I don't know exactly what the number that they attach to it. I think it's the 4070 series. But they're longer, and the reason that those microphones are designed longer is because the longer the microphone is, when you place it under clothing, the least movement noise you'll get when that clothing moves around. So Senken makes mics longer for that reason, and DPA has some options there as well. Audio-Technica, you'll see a lot of these, again, as kit microphones, and they have an ear set option and a lav option that come with their kits. Heil has some headset options that are in the bigger category, just like Crown. I don't see them a ton on theater, like you'll see them on stage shows, but not theater shows. All right. So
yeah, and then the Crown mics that I remember using are the CM311 and CM312, which sound great, but are enormous.
So here we have a picture of different microphone sizes. So here, we're going from biggest to smallest ish. So we start with the Mickey 2. The Mickey 2s, you can use them with or without the cap. So this is specifically with the high boost cap. They also have a flat protective cap. However, on most productions that I see and I participate in, we use them without the cap just because they're already so big. The cap just makes it that much bigger. But the cap offers protection from makeup and stuff getting into the element, and also offers some increased sweat protection. So when you're going without the cap, definitely keep in mind that that you can damage the microphone from sweat, from sweat, from makeup, from stuff like that. But you win some, you lose some, sort of situation. Then there's the B3, which is right around the size of the DPA. The cable is just a little bit thicker. Yeah, it's also got interchangeable caps. We'll talk more about caps in a second. To achieve different frequency responses. These you cannot use without the cap, but they have 3 different cap options. They're very susceptible to damage without that cap on there, so definitely keep that in mind. The 4060, and this is specifically a 4061, it also has interchangeable caps, and we'll talk said more about those in a second. That's actually the caps that'll be on the picture in the upcoming slide here. But those cannot be used without the caps, like the Mickey 2s or the Mickey 1s, which I'll talk more about in a second. You'll see here, this has a little flare on the back of it that's sort of a strain relief from the microphone to the cable. Some of the ones I'll show a little bit later do not have that flare. It's a thing on the newer 4060 series microphones, but they didn't used to have it. So it just helps with the microphone staying alive a little longer. Then there's a B6. So here's when we start to get into these would be considered miniature microphones, and these would be considered sub-miniature microphones. So the two really common options here are the B6 and the Mickey 1. The B6 is the Countryman option. Just like the B3, it's got interchangeable caps. These like to fall off a lot easier than, say, the cap on a B3 would, because they have this little lip here. So definitely keep that in mind, because when the cap's off, you lose a lot of that protection, just like you do with any microphone. Yeah, next, moving on to the Mickey 1. The Mickey 1 is, I see, a lot smaller than something like a Mickey 2. And it can be used, it's recommended to be used with the cap, of course, but its flat configuration is without the cap, and that's how I use it the most often. I don't know what Kevin's experience with this is, but I've...
Yeah, when Ryan says flat, he means EQ-wise, like it's not altering the characteristics of the sound. Yeah, and we'll talk about that with the caps in a second.
Yeah, that's just on the next slide. And then here's the same microphone with the cap, which makes it a little bit thicker. This sort of silvery finish on the end is an attempt by a lot of manufacturers, and you'll see this on like the 60 series as well, that they thought that the silver would blend into the skin better than a tan would, and that's not always the truth. So a lot of times you'll see these painted with nail polish or something like that to sort of hide the shininess there. And DPA is going to likely be coming out with a different cap for the 60 series that sort of hides that microphone better and is tan as opposed to this bronze color. Then this is the Mickey 1 just with the cap. Sorry.
And it's worth mentioning that the DPA 60 series, the 6060 or the 6061, are about the same size as the Mickey 1.
Yeah.
So they would fit right over there in that side. Also, while we're here, and also, I mean, you could go to the next slide and we'll talk about caps, but there's a question. John W. has a question that sort of is really specifically related here. And Ryan, I'm hoping you can help me answer it, because I know some microphones come with... John W.'s question is, how do you deal with makeup getting into Element, both prior to the production and cleaning it after it's clogged? We can talk about cleaning it a little bit more in a moment, but cap-wise, some microphones come with a protective cap. I feel like it's been the Mickey 1s. Maybe you can... Oh, yeah,
so
great.
Here I have some... so I have them for 3 different ones. So this is... I have them for Mickey 1s, DPAs, and Mickey 2s. Those are the 3 that really come with them. The Countryman ones don't, unfortunately, but yeah, I mean, you can definitely use the ones not for that specific manufacturer on the microphone. So it just slides sort of over the end of the mic, like so. So it just slides on and off. And then these are blue or red to make sure that people decide to take them off before they go on stage.
Like remove before flight sort of thing happening there.
Yeah. And the main thing is when you get the ones that are designed, and Mickey 1s, Mickey 2s, and the DPAs come with these, they just slide on really nice and they hold on. That's not to say that you couldn't just slide this over a microphone while you're putting your makeup on and hold it there.
You're just out of frame there, Ryan.
Oh, sorry. So you could still just slide this on and hold it there while you're putting the microphone on, but it won't hold on as well as it will where it slides on really nicely over this 4060. So yeah, you just keep that in mind. The Mickeys are designed a little differently. They're hard plastic as opposed to silicone. If you're ever looking to get, like, you don't have DPAs or you don't have these Sennheisers, you can order these caps. DPA sells them in 5 packs, and Sennheiser sells the Mickey 2 ones in 10 packs. The Mickey 1 ones are a little harder to get your hands on. I I had to have a bunch special ordered from Germany, and they were not as cheap as I would have wanted them to be.
This
But
definitely is also something that if you are on a budget, definitely could be arts and crafted.
yeah,
Uh, uh, John W mentions using the cutting off the tips of protective gloves and doing that. I could
yeah,
imagine using pen caps.
yeah, for
Um,
sure.
like there's feels like there's a lot of ways to address that issue. So just to clarify, these caps go on while the actor's putting on makeup and then get removed before the show happens. um and Scott Koenig mentions that you could probably find some heat shrink tubing that, like,
Yeah,
there's definitely a lot of ways to DIY that sort of a thing. Jack asks if those are made by the mic manufacturers, and yeah, the ones that Ryan is showing are the ones that are made by the mic manufacturers and often come with the mics. I wound up with like a little collection, just like Ryan has, of all those red ones from the Mickey ones, more than I knew what to do with, because
yeah.
one came with every microphone. But
I have me and one of my colleagues, we both have organizers that are chock full of them because it comes like 5 per mic. So when you're on a new production that gets a whole set of microphones in, like a new Broadway production that orders all new microphones for that production, the A2s typically accumulate a lot of them after that production closes. But that's not to say that you can't get them without, or that there's not other solutions. Like these I ordered because they get lost, or because I acquired microphones over the years, maybe used, that didn't come with them. So yeah, I mean, say a lot of times a finger will protect something like hairspray from getting into a microphone, but the caps are definitely a good alternative, or something like heat shrink or a glove. Oh, or like a little piece of like plastic tubing that you can buy at the store, meant for, or like aquarium tubing meant for connecting air hoses in aquariums. Just comment a little bit about the issue with point source microphones. What was that?
there was a question about whether the insulation was tearing, but
Oh,
uh, I think, yeah.
I will say on Mickey 2s, as Mickey 2s get older, their insulation likes to split. It's a really common issue with Mickey 2s is they just get brittle. So it definitely happens, and it's just because the thing is flexed so much, and a lot of times when hairspray gets on the cords, it can make them more brittle, and then they're likely to break. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. I mean, speaking on point sources, I know that they've been working to address this issue, but their lavs are great, but the headsets have had a tendency to break where the boom goes to the cable at the back of the neck, which is, I mean, there's a lot of strain there, so it's something that happens in the same way that it happens on an E6, for example. So definitely doing what you can to minimize that strain there is really important on any microphone. Just because you have, and I mean, I would think even more so on an expensive microphone, because you want to prolong the life of it, even though those expensive microphones will also often be more well built to resist that.
Let's let's keep talking about caps and then get to
Yeah,
the, I think we're almost to the end of this chunk, and I want to talk a little bit about cleaning at the end of this too. So
cool. Caps are little pieces of plastic that slide over the end of the microphones, um, to often offer different frequency responses. So here I have a bin of caps that are used for these are for all sorts of different microphones. Um, they're different lengths and different frequency responses. You can see in the picture here that we have a soft boost cap, is what GPA calls it, which is a flat cap, which is a flat frequency response. You can see here on this chart from Countryman that it would just be flat across the frequency spectrum, and then a high boost cap here, which would have an attenuation more like this middle one here. So they're offering different frequency responses that can help you get a different sound in acoustically right at the microphone. With how the microphones work, the longer that chamber is that surrounds the microphone, the more low frequency or high frequency attenuation you can get, which a lot of times can be really helpful for like an ear rig, where that side of the ear side of the face placement that an ear rig gives you will be a little muffled sounding. So putting a cap right on the microphone to get you more high frequency in there can give you a better sounding, crisper microphone, while also at the same time reducing the amount of noise that you would get from, say, attenuating up the high frequencies at the console. So definitely a really useful thing to have. So yeah, I use them a lot. A lot of manufacturers just have flat and a single level of high boost. Countryman has flat, what they call bright, which is a 4 dB high boost, and very bright, which is an 8 dB high boost. Some manufacturers, because they only have the one level, it'll be 4 or maybe even 6 dB high boost. So it all depends on the manufacturer, and they have charts for those different responses for all of them.
And sort of the like non-audio engineer way of putting it is just that if it's a high boost cap or whatever, it just sort of makes the vocals a little bit crisper, a little bit easier to understand if you're in a more muffled place like the ear rig or something.
Yeah, and different designers have different opinions on and thoughts on when to use them and when not to. Some designers will put a high boost cap on every microphone. Other designers will, like what I do, is I put a high boost cap on an ear rig, but a flat cap on a forehead mic. And some voices will want different caps too. So some people may sound better with the high boost cap, getting that high boost right at the element. So it all depends. All right. So next is sensitivities. So sensitivities are the different. I don't know the best way to put this, but they're they have to do with how much level is going to be coming out of the microphone. So if you set the same gain level on the console, that they would be louder or quieter from the mic. So a lot of manufacturers have a lower sensitivity recommended for theater. It depends on the manufacturer. All right, so I think this is a good part to talk about cleaning microphones. So I will let Kevin talk about that for a second.
Yeah, just I was going to say with the caps that a lot of times the caps are what takes the brunt of the makeup or other dirt coming from the actor, and so if you're getting a microphone that's starting to sound really muffled, just make sure you take a look at the cap. The great thing about the cap is they can come off, and so you can blow air through them from the inside out to blow that dirt off. You can also usually wash them. You'll want to check your microphone manufacturer specs to make sure that you're washing it correctly. But usually, just in distilled water is fine. I've also even used a jewelry cleaner, like an ultrasonic vibrator thing that vibrates the dirt off. And yeah, and there's also guidelines for how to actually clean the elements themselves. Some of them you can actually clean in distilled water as long as you make sure they fully dry, but that's definitely manufacturer specific. So I would check the manufacturer for their recommended cleaning guidelines.
Yeah, manufacturers like DPA have guides for how to clean them, and for the caps, if one gets done past repair, you can order replacement caps, but they're quite costly. So a lot of times they'll get lost, and you'll need to order new ones. But they usually run about $10 a piece, so definitely try to keep them when you can. The microphone that has that biggest issue is a B6 for sure. They just like to fall right off. But yeah. All right.
Hey.
Okay. So next is coloring. So custom coloring is something that's done a lot, especially for Broadway shows, for shows where they have a microphone set up for each person that's specific to the person. A lot of times in shorter runs or lower budget theaters, it's not always an option to custom color a microphone per person. But there's some techniques to deal with that I will show here in a second. So why do we do it? To hide mics, either in real hair, in costumes sometimes, depending on where your placement is, or to match skin tones better. A lot of manufacturers may only make mics in tan or beige or cocoa, or sometimes called brown or black. And then some manufacturers will make mics in white, which can sometimes be good for custom coloring, although I don't use white very often. So So yeah, we color them to help hide them. So there's two main ways to do this. The first is with a marker. The common marker choices are Prismacolor and Copic. So they will color the mics, and especially if you give them a good amount of time to dry, because their markers do have like a paint component to them. So letting that dry will definitely help prolong the life of it. But they eventually wear off, which can sometimes be good if you want to bring that microphone back to its former glory, but they'll never come all the way off. They definitely stain some. And then another thing to note is do not use Sharpie, because the Sharpies, when they react with sweat and heat, will turn purple. So they may turn your microphone black for a short period of time, but shortly after that, they will become purple. Another really common choice, and the one that I lean towards, is paint. So the common choice is shoe specifically for leather paint. Melatonin makes some Metolian. I think it's Metolian.
Meltonian.
Meltonian. I'm not the best with the words sometimes. Makes some really good options for this. And it's more durable with marker, but another upside is that it can often be removed for the most part with just some alcohol, some rubbing alcohol, and some elbow grease. You can get that off. Yeah.
I think that I'll just say I disagree with it saying it's more durable than marker. It is more. You can apply a color more intensely with shoe paint, in my experience, and my experience could be different than Ryan's. But as a touring person, I would find that I had to repaint them after every move because it would sort of flake off. Which is kind of the big difference is that the paint sort of sits on the outside of the mic, whereas the paint markers, the paint pens, sort of absorb into the sheath of the mic. So I had to reapply paint way more often than I do marker. I'll also just say that painting microphones is sort of the secret sauce of many A2s, and a lot of A2s have their own tricks for this sort of thing. So anytime you're able to talk to an A2 who works on a Broadway style show, ask them how they paint their mics, because they probably have some sort of clever way to do it.
Yeah, so definitely the paint does, it appears as more of a solid color because the pens are, I mean, they're more liquidy when they go on. But yeah, the amount that the mic is flexed can definitely break off the spray, the spray on paint. Some people also like to use shoe polish, although I've never used. I'm sorry, not nail polish, although I've never used it. And yeah, for sure the paint, the pens soak in more. Um, yeah. So next is questions, and I think that we have a few here. So the first thing that I just like to is the fiber optic caps. I believe for the SP series fiber optic connectors would be the right ones for that. I never thought to use those, but those seem like a great option for protection.
Yeah. And we've addressed a lot of the questions. John W. asked, how often do you replace a mic during a run? It definitely varies. On the Memphis tour, we replaced mics a lot. On Hamilton, we rarely replace mics. It depends on how they're being used and how well they're sort of strain relieved, which we'll show later. Also, depends on your budget. Sometimes you're on a show that can afford to replace mics when they're just a little dull, and sometimes you're on a show where they have to be completely broken before you replace them.
Yeah, it really depends on the budget, for sure. So Copic markers use alcohol-based inks. Do you have experience with using other types of markers with other inks? I do not. I've only used those, and I don't use the markers very often. I tend to lean more towards the paint. So I don't know if you have anything on that, Kevin.
I mean, I feel like every time I am in an art store or on Amazon, like I'll buy a bunch of different markers just to try them and see if they work. But Prismacolor and Copic tend to be the ones that I see used the most, and I don't remember having any big success with any others. But painting was also always the sort of the bane of my existence as an A2. So I would often get frustrated. But anyway, Prismacolor and Copic are definitely the ones that mostly we stuck with. And then Scott says, does a high boost cap affect the risk of a ringing type feedback? And yeah, for sure it does. Just feedback is a simple equation of input versus output. So if you're inputting more high end, you're increasing the risk of feedback from that high end. I'm sure we could have an hours long discussion about sending the sound from the microphones back into the speakers that are audible on stage. Uh, in general, that's something to avoid doing, and that will reduce your risk of that feedback. But yeah, that's definitely just like turning up the high EQ is going to increase your risk of a ringing feedback too. Yeah, it's always a risk versus reward thing there.
We'll say the caps do have a slope to them that there's no sharp like points at which they're boosting. So if they were like that, you would have a higher risk. But since they're more of a shelf, there's less of a risk for sure. All right.
Cool.
Tape. So we're just going to go over a couple types of tape. The first and most common being transport. All the ones that we're going to mention are all made by 3M. You can also find this branded as NextCare, which is 3M's sort of sell to consumer and brand. So if you ever have to run into a drugstore last minute and get it, it would be sold as 3M NextCare clear first aid tape. So it's really common. It's just about the cheapest out of all of them. You can really easily rip it in your fingers. However, it can irritate skin more than some of the other options that we'll mention, and some actors will refuse to use it because of that. So you definitely keep that in mind. And that it's mostly transparent when it's applied and patted down correctly, but it can definitely be seen depending on how it's applied and what it's applied over. A lot of times if you find yourself putting it over top makeup, it can be shown. And with that, definitely try to put tape on bare skin as much as you can, because it will stick on a lot better than it will on makeup for sure. Transport can be found in 1/2 inch and 1 inch rolls. I usually keep both in stock. I'll up around the ear usually do 1/2 inch, and I will often do 1/2 inch on the back of the neck as well. But for some people, or particularly sweaty people, the 1 inch can be really useful. And don't forget that if you buy a 1 inch roll, you can always tear it down the middle. That's pretty easy. But the 1/2 inch and 1 inch don't really cost any more or less for the same volume of tape. Yeah. Next.
And if you do need this, sort of last minute, like Ryan said, you can get it in the drugstores, CVS, Walgreens, that sort of place. Make sure you buy the 3M stuff. The store brands tend to be a lot less friendly to use, and also it's really expensive when you're doing that. So do what you can to get it online or from a medical supplier or something. But it's always an option.
Yeah, in general, you can buy a box of 24 rolls or 12 rolls of 1 inch tape for like $10 on Amazon versus like $4 a roll at CVS. So definitely try to buy it ahead when you can, because it's a lot cheaper and you're getting the higher quality 3M tape. So next is Tegaderm. So Tegaderm is in this interesting sort of midwater. So it comes in a roll, as you can see, and you cut it all along lines down the roll, and then it applies sort of like a Band-Aid. So it is often more transparent than something like transport is, but it's harder to put on. It sticks against itself really often. However, it's a lot gentler on the skin, and that can be really good for some people. It can also stick on better sometimes in sweatier situations. It all depends on the person, really.
Tegaderm can also come in sheets. We use it a lot on Hamilton, and we get a bunch of the small sheets and then cut them in half, and that works really well for us. It's also I think it's fair to say it's a little bit more expensive. Maybe it's quite a bit more expensive. I haven't looked at the pricing lately, but
in terms of buying a box with this one large roll in it, it's about the same, but you definitely get less usable tape by tenfold with Tegaderm.
Gotcha.
And so it's also purchasable last minute. You can buy Band-Aids with Tegaderm in them and sort of cut around the Band-Aid to get your Tegaderm. But I don't like doing that very much. The roll has always been the easiest for me. So next is Blenderm. So Blenderm is also very gentle on skin. However, it has to be cut with scissors. It's a latex-free rubbery sort of tape, and it's doesn't stick on nearly as well as Transpore or Tegaderm does. But for some people, it can be what they need for their skin. So I have a lot of actors that like sometimes will come in and they just flew in and they're like, I need Blender. And that's just the tape that they use. So I hand them a pair of scissors and blend them and they go on their way for the production. So yeah, it's not nearly as breathable as something, especially like Transport. Transport has little holes in it that can help it breathe. But Blenderm is not, it's solid. And so for something that's more gentle on the skin, it can be easier to deal with than Tegaderm, but it's definitely a pain to have either way. And then lastly is Micropore. I don't find myself using Micropore ever. I don't actually keep it in stock, but it's more common in film. It's paper based as opposed to a latex alternative, rubber based. But some people like it. It's not transparent. It's available in white or tan. But some in film that they like it, you can put makeup on it. Well, it's gentle on skin, but it's not really sticky. And the few times that I've used it, it's never lasted a whole show. So definitely keep that in mind. All right, any tape questions?
I haven't seen any tape questions.
Cool.
Yeah. Well, we can come back and grab them if they show up after we continue on here.
Great. So now we're getting into the meat and potatoes, which is mic rigging. So this is, how we fix microphones to people. So first is ear rigs. So ear rigs is a very common way of getting them into that ear placement that we talked about earlier. They're composed of this ear loop, and then some floral wire and some Hellerman sleeves. You'll see in all these pictures that a lot of times I chose contrasting colors, which are not the colors that we would usually use in building a rig. And I'll talk more about the colors that this stuff is available in a little bit. But yeah, they're adjustable, as I mentioned earlier, to make the microphone closer or farther from the mouth. Yeah. All right. So first, what tools you need to make these? So I use a set of cutters. These are just a set of Hakko flush cuts, a set of Hakko pliers to help you bend the wire some. You can use any set of side cutters and pliers that you want, and then a Hellerman Sleeve tool. This is a specific tool. And the way it works is it allows you to squeeze in and out and stretch those sleeves, which you'll see more in a minute. All right, so next is the sleeves. So this Hellerman tool uses these sleeves that are sold by Hellerman. It can also use surgical latex tubing. I don't know if the Hellerman sleeves themselves are latex free as opposed to the tubing. I'm not sure. I've never actually used the tubing, so I can't speak to that. Kevin's used it more. But the Hellerman sleeves are purchasable in a few different sizes. I carry H15 and H20, which is 15 millimeters or 1.5 millimeters in diameter. And then I sort of listed that what microphone sizes those can be useful for, which all depends on the cable thickness and then also the thickness of what you're putting that sleeve around. So Hellerman sleeves are available in tan, brown, and black. Unfortunately, the brown is only available in H20 size. I don't know why they don't make it in H15. And then there's also some weirder colors. They make it in some of the sizes in gray, blue, pink. I've never had gray, blue, and red. I believe that the tan is actually sold as pink. But I've never had a use for those. I'm sure that there could be some fun placement opportunities that use those. But yeah. So next is wire. So this floral or beading wire is used to wrap around the element to create that boom, which we'll look more at a second. Some of the common colors that you'll find this in for floral wire will be black, green, which is really common if you had to run down to the arts and crafts store, or silver. Oftentimes I'll find myself using the black for black or cocoa mic elements and the silver for tan mic elements. The silver really isn't as visible as you would think once it's up on the stage. But there are also some options that are here, like this like sort of bronzish color. And I have a pack that will be linked in the description, which is beading wire. That is a multiple color pack, so you have different color varieties to use. The green has been common. I've seen it used before. Again, once it's up on the stage, it's not as visible as you would think, but it's definitely green wire. Another thing to keep in mind with floral wire versus beading wire is floral wire is usually made out of steel, and versus beading wire, which is made out of a different mix of metals, and floral wire therefore is more likely to rust with a prolonged exposure to sweat than beading wire would be. All right. So
and then also, just to mention, WA4RTS mentions that the cutters you showed earlier are really aimed at like really soft wire, the softer copper wire. So just make sure that you match the cutter with the wire that you're using. There's definitely cutters that are better for harder steel wire if you're using that. We'll mention later that on Hamilton we use a lot of music wire, and we use a much sturdier cutter for that. So just make sure you match the cutter and the softness of its blades to the appropriate wire. You don't want to destroy all your cutters on hard wire or something.
And these flush cutters I really like because they're just really easy and small, but definitely they're designed for softer wire. So I think that they're fine on the beading wire. They're also really useful to help you cut off the Hellerman sleeves when you're taking apart a rig. There are also another pair of scissors that I find myself using, which are these little pair, which are floral nippers, and these are made by Fiskars, and they can be really useful in cutting off Hellerman sleeves. However, they're really sharp at the end, so if you're not careful with them, you can find yourself cutting into a microphone element, and I've done it more times than I would like to admit. So I have recently gone more towards those Hakko flush cuts for cutting off Hellerman sleeves, and they're really useful for that. They're also just useful to have in your kit in general for cutting zip ties really nice and flush. All right, so next is ear loops. So we have two styles here. Common and what you'll see on a lot of productions are these, which are made for IFBE earpieces by Telex. And they're a little bit on the costly side. I feel like I see them for between $8 to $12 a piece. So unfortunately, they are a little costly, but they're definitely the most manufactured in terms of having this nice piece of plastic on them to protect the ear and stuff like that. Some common modifications that you'll see to them are either putting a little piece of Hellerman sleeve to keep this from catching anyone's ear, or just cutting it off completely, like in this one. I definitely feel like I see it cut off completely a lot. Anyways, these are, I don't use these anymore, but these are some homemade ones that I made a long time ago. These are made out of fencing wire, which there'll be a link for in the description, and heat shrink. So these can be made for a lot cheaper than the pre-made options are, for sure, because you can buy a big spool of fencing wire. However, they're harder. Well, they're not as ideal as the Telex ones, for sure. So, you work with what you can afford. At the time that I made the homemade ones, I couldn't afford the Telex ones, so it's definitely something to keep in mind. All right, so now we're gonna get into the making of the ear rig. So the first step is to cut the floral wire, or the beading wire. So the length that you want to cut it depends on how long you want to make the boom. So between 4 to 8 inches is what I commonly find myself doing, depending on what the production requires. So here's just two lengths. So you cut those off the spool, and then you'll take it, and I like to fold it down the middle. You'll see more about why I fold this in the middle later. And that's because I wrap it around like this, and that I take the middle that was folded and then wrap them sort of opposing each other down the length of the boom. Some pictures, like if you look at the Masque guide that will be linked in the description, you'll find that they don't do this double wrap and they just do a single wrap. I prefer the double wrap because it doesn't leave a sharp end of wire down here. All the sharp ends are under the Hellerman sleeves, which will be back here on the ear. And also that when you do that single wrap around, you end up wrapping the wire tighter. And when the wire's wrapped tighter, it can leave marks going down the element cable. So just prolonging the life of your elements, if you plan on rigging and de-rigging them often for different productions, this can be better. But the other method is perfectly useful, and different people will have different methods of building these. It's another one of the secret A2 things, and we'll actually talk about a super fun method a little later. So next is to wrap the wire around the ear loop, affixing the element to the ear loop. So I just sort of wrap it around, and then I use the pliers to sort of pat down that end of that wire, which is really important to make sure that wire isn't going to stick through the Hellerman sleeve and stab anyone's ear. And it's also important to make sure that when you're doing that you don't end up putting an end of a wire somewhere that when the microphone element is moved around, it'll end up puncturing into the microphone element, because that can cause damage and cause things to short out.
I've also used a little file to file down the pointy part of the wire.
I've actually never done that. The more you know.
Well, file that away.
So the next step is to put the sleeve up onto the Hellerman tool. So you need a lubricant to allow you to both put it on and then slide them off. So some common options for that are soapy water, hand sanitizer, and then Hellerman makes a purpose-made lubricant, which sometimes will come with your Hellerman tool. I don't really use that because it's sort of slimy and is almost too slippery. So sometimes you'll find that when you go to open up the tool, the Hellerman sleeve will just slide right off the tool. So I don't use that a ton, but it's definitely an option.
I usually choose I choose between soapy water and hand sanitizer depending on how I want the sleeve to behave once it's on whatever I'm putting it on, because soapy water will tend to let it slide around for a little bit longer, whereas hand sanitizer will evaporate faster and will sort of like let it seize into place a little bit sooner.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of times you'll find, or something to be careful of is once you put that sleeve up onto the microphone, or sorry, once you put the sleeve up onto the tool, that it will dry out pretty fast, especially if you're using soapy water. So don't like put a sleeve on the tool and then go run around and do something and try to put it on a rig, because you'll end up not being able to slide the sleeve off the tool. Now you can totally get the sleeve off, just like sitting there and re-lubricate it. But if you go to put it on the element, it can be hard to get it off once it's on that rig.
And especially don't run around with the tool because it's really pointy. So don't run around with the tool. Don't stab people with it, and watch out for your fingers as you're sliding the sleeve on, because it hurts.
Yeah, so I made this little thing the other day, actually. That's just a little plastic cover to protect the ends. A lot of times people will use corks as well, just to keep these ends from stabbing anyone. Definitely don't leave your tool sitting up like this, because that's a really easy way to come in with a hand and just wreck your hand. Yeah. So next would be to slide the Hellerman sleeve over that wrapped wire on the element. So what I end up doing to do this is folding the element end down so it's in line with this end piece, and then taking it, and once it's in place, sort of holding it with your hand and pulling the tool off. And then after you've put one on, I usually like to do a second, and then sometimes a little extra piece on the end here to just sort of secure the cable, depending on where you want it to come off. So yeah, that is an ear rig. Some other common sort of implementations that you'll see with, or one major thing that you'll see some shows do, is instead of having the wire come off, or the element come off the top like this, it'll carry down and then come off here. I've never personally built one like that, but I've seen it a good few times. Yeah. Anything to add there, Kevin?
It's a beautiful ear rig. I have nothing to add.
Great. So next we're going to get into placing and taping ear rigs. So for these, I like to do a piece of tape up here on this, I don't know what the part of this ear is called. The helix. I looked that up actually the other day. And then, and then another piece back behind here. Unfortunately, I didn't get a really good picture of that, but it's just on the end of the bottom of the piece of the ear rig of the loop, holding it to the back of behind the ear. And then another piece at the back of the neck. It's important that when you put this piece on the back of the neck, have them turn their head to the opposite side that the ear rig's on. That way, when they go to turn their head in a production, they won't pull that tape up. So make sure that there's slack there. You can also twist the cable a little bit as you're taping it, and that will help the cable stay stuck to the fit, like the loop of the cable from the ear back to the back of the neck stay against their head once they go back to that straight on position. Another thing that
you don't want, you always have like a, like my, like you have like the loop of the microphone coming out like my headset microphone is. It looks bad. Don't do that.
Another thing that's really, really important is to make sure that you're bending this ear loop so that it's fitting their ear properly. A lot of times, what you want to make sure that the tape isn't holding a piece of wire towards their head. The tape is there to keep it from falling off, but you don't want it holding anything in to their head. So I often end up finding myself sort of scrunching it together so that the back of the element or of the ear loop sticks up into this little pocket in the back of their ear there. And that's also really useful for the headsets, which I'll talk about a bit later. And I have some more pictures of that to come. So next, this is Kevin, some alternate methods to ear loops.
Yeah, this is mostly just here so that I can just mention that for Hamilton we do a microphone that we call the ALC Special, which is named for one of our sound team, Annalie Craig, who sort of really came up with the idea in the first place as part of a team effort. But it's basically just a custom-made ear rig that comes where the microphone comes under the ear instead of going over the ear. That for us, that helps it get away from some of the hats. We use a lot of hats in the show. This is mostly used for the ensemble and for a few of the lead characters, but it helps get that microphone away from the hats. And in our case, we custom build each of these for every actor, and we use spring steel or music wire or piano wire. It's kind of all the same idea. And it's, so what we'll do first is we'll do a mold of the back of their ear using art wire or craft wire, and then we'll use that to be a model to make this loop out of the spring steel. The spring steel is great because you can bend it if you apply a lot of force, but if you apply just a little force, it'll snap back to its normal position. So it can take a lot of abuse from an actor without deforming. And then as you can see, there's a little bit of a plastic sleeve on the back of the ear loop. We add that just for comfort. And it's a little hard to see in this photo, but underneath this image is from the Adam Savage video where he interviews Adriana Brannon, who's the A2 on our production here in San Francisco. And underneath her thumbs there's actually another piece that sticks up, and that goes in front of the earlobe, which I find very beneficial, and I don't see on commercial earpieces, but it really locks the whole thing to the ear very effectively. And then we use monofilament. In our case, in the case of this, we use very, very thin monofilament, 2-pound test fluorocarbon line to tie the microphone itself to the spring steel as it extends out on the boom. So like I said, this is very custom. It takes a lot of time to do. I often don't build them. I never build them. Adriana builds all of ours. She's very talented at it, but it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of practice. It's sort of a whole other webinar to talk about building these, but I just wanted to include a mention that don't take, you can experiment with the placement and the building of these ear rigs a lot and come up with some very clever, useful ideas. And then the last thing I'll mention too is that when we put these on actors, we tape them similar to how Ryan tapes his. If you could take a step back, a slide back, Ryan.
1 second.
Yeah. So where Ryan is taping the one piece to the front of the ear, we actually tape we tape to the top of the ear. I don't know if you can see if I take off my headset, but we tape to the top of the ear, and then we also tape in the back of the ear. So we're sort of taping the entire earpiece around the back of the ear with no tape that's visible to the audience when the actor is face on. So lots of options. But I will say, I think it was Stephanie earlier who was talking about their microphones moving around a lot, and I feel like this sort of taping is the stuff to do. Try and tape around the ear as much as possible and see if that holds it in place better for you. And definitely always do the tape on the back of the neck. And then the one last thing that sometimes we do, if you have an actor who's opposed to tape on the back of the neck, or if if you're just having a hard time getting it to be stable, is you can add a toupee clip, which we'll show you in a minute here, to the microphone and toupee clip it up into the back of the hair. Instead of doing the tape on the back of the neck, or in addition to it, it can really stabilize that. And we'll show you toupee clips here in the next section.
Yeah, unfortunately, I didn't get a picture of that, but yeah, that's definitely useful. A big thing is, and really with getting these to hold on, is making sure that you're bending that wire, whatever ear loop you've made, that bending it in a way that really holds it on there from the earpiece. The tape is there to secure it, but it is not there to support any weight. And if you have that tape trying to support weight for a multiple hour long production, it won't work out. It'll end up falling off. Another thing,
and depending on the springiness of your wire, you might have to squeeze it down to the ear for almost every show, or not. So
another thing to add, and with these ear loops, some people, when they custom build them out of fencing wire or spring wire as a loop as opposed to the boom like Kevin's production makes, they do this piece and then they also come around the back and have it grab the bottom of the ear, and that's definitely a good option. The Telex ones don't do that, but if you're building them yourself, building another little loop with the same sort of bent over end as this coming around under the ear, and then making the same sort of boom mic in the same way as the other style we showed, can definitely help it be more secure, for sure.
Yeah, and John W. just asked if you could add these custom earpieces to headsets to make them more secure. Sure. Yeah, why not? Like if you make a custom earpiece and you affix it to the headset, maybe with monofilament or maybe with crafting wire, sure. You'll also run the risk that it'll make the wire thicker, so maybe it'll show up more, or maybe it'll kind of sit in the ear a little bit weirder. But yes, try it and see if it works. Definitely, I'm not going to tell you not to do it. You could certainly have success with it.
The big issue with a lot of the pre-made headsets is how they come around the ear and then out from that, as opposed to coming under the ear. Putting a lot of the more of the weight lower on the ear definitely helps it stay on better, for sure. I don't think that any of the middle range ear sets make them that way, but people definitely can have more success and less tape with it coming from under the ear. With the ear rigs, it's not too bad because they're not super long like those booms are, but it can definitely be helpful to come under with those longer booms. All right.
Excellent.
So next, there's sort of a mesh here, which is Point Source Audio makes these pre-made ear loops that have the little track in them to hold the microphone element. So these can be really great if you have the budget. They're a little expensive at about $40, and they only sell them in a pair of left and right ear, which is sort of weird because in a given production, you're usually trying to put them all on one side of a person's face or another. So you'll end up just having a bunch sitting around that are the other ear variant that you don't need. But these come in this piece, and this piece actually extends down a lot further, almost to out here. And they have this little cap, so you clip them to a length that is good for your actor, which I'll show more about what that length is in a bit. And then you put this little rubber cap over, which both keeps the sharp plastic and a little bit of wire that is embedded in this plastic from poking the actor, and this little nub can provide some more security. since it's a more grippy rubber. So they have this little track. You sort of put the microphone in the track, and then it sort of hangs out. So this track. One of the downsides is designed to work with the point source microphone thickness. So it also works with the DPAs, and of course can work with thinner microphones. But a lot of times when you use it with thinner microphones, you're going to have to do this Hellerman around it. Now, I do the Hellerman no matter what, really, because they sort of like to fall off, especially on the ends. So I'll put these little pieces of Hellerman sleeve to help secure it. Again, these were chosen for color contrast. But yeah, these are definitely definitely useful and really comfortable to a lot of people, more so than just say a Telex earrig would be. So I definitely like them when I can afford them, which is not often. Yeah, so next is how to tape these. So these I found can be done with a lot less tape than the Telex rigs. They really, I've found out that some actors, like after a production, I found out that they weren't using tape the entire time, and I was like, what? How are you not using tape? But it's definitely a thing that's possible. So when they do require tape, oftentimes a little piece back here behind the ear is enough, or if they don't have, in this specific person, I didn't want to tape over their hair, but if they have a little less hair right here, you can just do a tape sort of right over this cross where the wire comes out at the back. That's really useful. Again, piece of tape on the back of the neck, just like with the other rig. And just to talk here for a second, you can see how this is sort of pressed up into the ear, and you'll find that in the back of your ear, under the cartilage, there's a little spot where there's sort of a little divot, where there's a piece of cartilage that if you sort of shove your wire up into there a little bit and make sure it's sort of clamping in that section, can help it stay really stable. And that's something that'll be really useful for those pre-made ear sets. All right. Next is Toupee Clips. So Toupee Clips are super, super common for forehead microphones used with real hair. So they're really simple. They're these little clips that are designed for toupees or wigs to hold into the little bit of natural hair that may be there. And we outfit them with a little piece of elastic that either runs straight across here or with this style that's a little bit more twisted. And they allow you to attach, that piece of elastic allows you to attach the microphone element to the clip, and it also allows you to slide the clip forward and backward on the microphone. Yeah. I typically stick to this 23 millimeter or 2.3 centimeter size. They're also available in 28, and then sometimes when you run out to the store just to grab some, as opposed to ordering them online, they come in this larger 32 plus millimeter size, sometimes even bigger than this. I really like to stick with the small ones when I can. Some people's hair requires the medium ones, but most of the time, depending on how tight you make the elastic, the small ones can go onto any mic element. These are orderable straight from China is the cheapest way to get it, but it also takes longest. There's a few. There's one eBay seller that sells them specifically for production, which is called Monkey Wrench Productions. There'll be a link for it. Their shipping gets a little expensive when you start ordering a lot of them. I don't know if they offer a bulk shipping discount, but yeah. So here's some of the colors that they're available in. So this is sort of the whole spectrum, as these 5 colors is what you'll usually find. So blonde, and then 3 shades of brown and black. And then you can often find elastic to match that. Sometimes it's hard though, so I found as close as I could get with the sort of off-white, and then the 3 browns I just use the same color brown elastic on, and then the black one I have black elastic for. Finding those colors of elastic can sometimes be hard, and also getting a good quality elastic. So I will have a link for a brand that I found to be good in the description, but yeah. And how to tie them. So here's a little bit more detail of the 2 ways to tie them. There will be a guide in the description once that link's there from Masque Sound that shows this way of tying them. A lot of people stick to this way because they sort of suck to tie both ways, and they're easier to tie this way for sure than this way. But when you do the twisted style, you can run a mic element through from end to end, and it doesn't have the same risk of twisting it like wrapping it around this single piece of elastic does. So there are advantages and disadvantages. What I like to do is run it through, tie a little overhand knot on either side of this, or it would be a square knot in this case, and then I like to dab it with super glue, let it dry, and then cut it flush. I know Kevin uses an overhand, or a figure 8 knot, and doesn't find that he needs to super glue it with the figure 8 knot. Different people have different strategies for tying these for sure. Another important thing to note, is that the holes in these are different sizes. So this hole is a little bit larger than this. So I find that 1mm elastic works really well with this specific hole. And there'll be links for that in the description. Next, placing and taping these. So here, you'll see that the way to do this with real hair is to sort of part across, not where someone's natural part is, and then clip the microphone in and fold the hair back over that. In this application, I didn't cover it the best so that you guys can see it, but that's sort of the way you do it. Then you run it down the back of the head. I often find myself doing either 2 or 3 toupee clips per microphone, so one at the top of the head, one at the back of the head at the minimum, and then sometimes another one will end up around here, but it just depends. I usually start with 2, and some people will ask for 3. Then on some productions, you'll do a piece of tape on the forehead or a little bobby pin that comes in here and goes through to the microphone. Comes over the microphone and goes into the hair. I try to discourage bobby pins for someone that doesn't know how to really use them because they can put holes in the jacket of the microphone. But if you sort of stretch the bobby pin out a little bit before you use it, it can be perfectly fine and perfectly usable. And then here, there's just a piece of tape at the back of the neck, which we've been doing with all of the different microphone styles. Okay. And then here is sort of the final result. Here I have an unpainted microphone run through the hair, and then here I painted this microphone, which is actually the microphone that was in the original picture of why to paint a mic. So as you can see, other than just this barely seeing the toupee clip here, which I could have probably done a better job hiding, this painted microphone almost completely hides and you can't really see it. You notice that when I paint this, because I wanted the microphone to hang down onto the forehead a little bit, I painted it with a couple inches unpainted left at the end. If you wanted it more at the hairline, you could paint it all the way. That's adjustable there. Yeah. So these hide, if you do it right, can hide really well. A lot of times you'll have the wig, hair, makeup department hide those for you. But I did this for this example. All right, next is...
And a tool that's really helpful for that is like a comb with a long tail, like a rat tail comb, you might call it.
This is,
hey, look, there you go, just like that.
There's a rat tail comb, so when I use, they're great. I haven't really thought at all about the sanitizing of these, especially in the times that we're in, but definitely make sure to keep that in mind when you're going around and doing a bunch of different people's hair to try and sanitize those regularly. All right. So next is halos. So halos can be a good way that uses elastic to get a mic in that forehead position, but not run it through the hair. They can often be quicker to put on. A lot of times I'll see them used in rehearsals when, say, in a show, the person will have a wig mic, but for a rehearsal they're not wearing the whole wig cap get up. A halo can be really useful for that. And sometimes they can be hard to conceal depending on your person's hair. Like here, you can see the elastic running through the side of his hair. But on her, it hides really well. So it all depends on the specific person that you're putting them on. Yeah, so here's, I guess I didn't have a slide showing how to tie that. But it's basically just a piece of elastic that ties in 2 spots on the front of the element. And the reason for that is when you tie it in the 2 places, one directs the element down towards the mouth, and then the other turns it back and has it come off to the side. Masque's guide, which will be in the description, shows how to tie that more. And then there's another knot that meets on the back of the element here and goes down the neck. Now, taping or painting these can also be really useful to help you conceal them. But yeah, it all depends on what that person requires. You can see it hides pretty well in her hair, but in his hair, it's creating some lines here, and it doesn't quite hide as well. So it depends on the person for sure. Okay, next is mics concealed in wigs. So earlier you sort of saw a picture of how those transmitters would have sat in that wig. Here you can see how this ended up in an Elphaba from the Wicked production on the West End. So here her transmitters sit in under her wig and under her hat here, and then the elements stick down. She has two elements, and one's in the center and one's off to the side. I would guess that the one in the center is likely the primary, but it's their choice. So yeah, it's a very common placement. Yeah.
Yeah.
One more thing to add here is, so I noted the do not slide bobby pins, or more so be careful with bobby pins. When you're using wigs with wig caps, you can use wig pins and use those wig pins to pull the wig cap over the element and secure it, as opposed to putting a pin over the element. Putting that softer wig cap over the element can definitely be good. All right, next is cable management and strain relief. So these are two pictures from Kevin, and they are both of a strain relief on an element connector and a cable management for excess cable. So first, this is a method of sort of just shorting away that excess cable to just keep it orderly, because a lot of times these elements are longer than we need them to be, and in this case, it's a good few feet longer than you need it to be, and that'll sort of depend on which microphone manufacturer and the person. So this strain or this sort of management can help deal with that extra slack. Then here is a strain relief, and these can be really useful to prevent the microphone from failing at the connector. So especially with these LEMO connectors that can be harder to re-terminate, this little extra piece of Hellerman sleeve with the element cable folded over can prevent the strain from being here, and instead put the strain in somewhere that's got a little bit more give, and it can prolong the life of the element a long ways. In terms of a thing touch here would be elements breaking at the connector, which is definitely something that's repairable. I repair them myself. A lot of manufacturers will offer a service where you can send them into the manufacturer and get them repaired. Or you can find your local A2. Some A2s will happily do microphone element repairs for a low cost, which is usually a lot less than what it would cost to replace the element, or even the cable for an element that has a detachable cable like an E6. Yeah.
I don't do this kind of repair, so please don't call me for that.
I do. But
Call Ryan.
So if anyone has a stack of elements with bad connectors, I could repair them for them.
There you go.
Yeah. It's not the most fun though, so I don't want like a stack of 100.
Yeah, and just in terms of keeping things clean, like you mentioned, at the very least, alcohol swabs are definitely your thing to wipe down with alcohol wipes as much as possible. Jack Bernard asks, is having the mic just at the hairline acceptable, or do you recommend placing it a tad bit down on the forehead? That is 100% a decision that happens at the creative level, because it's a trade-off between appearance versus the amount of sound that you get, the gain before feedback. If you're the sound designer, then you're going to want to talk to the director and sort of make a decision for yourselves as to how much of that mic being visible you're willing to accept versus, if you're already aware that you'll know how much sound you get, or if you need to do some experimentation, then do some experimentation. But you'll sort of see the trade-offs there.
Yeah. No, I mean, I definitely find that depending on what the production's goals are, really affect where I can put them. And also, it depends on how strong a vocalist you have. A lot of times when you work, you may think, oh, when I do the shows at a high school, I have to put the mic so low, they look like they have a mosquito bite in the center of their eyebrows. And then you go see a Broadway show and they may be higher. And that's both an artistic decision that particular show may have made, and that they're often a lot stronger singers than, say, a high school singer would be. So those are all things that you have to keep in mind when you're deciding how you want to place them. All right.
So we're just at 2 hours, so we've got one more section. Sweat.
Yes, we're on the home stretch. So next is sweat. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to deal with this. So first is transmitter protection. So the way that things have been going and what people usually prefer as the best is these water-resistant pouches, often made out of like neoprene or a similar material. Wireless mic belts make some great ones. There's a few other ones that are made. I believe that the Neopax ones are. The Shure ones are made out of neoprene, but I don't know if they're necessarily water-resistant. So they can be commercially purchased, or your wardrobe department can definitely buy neoprene and make them out of neoprene. The neoprene ones are really great because they are more breathable but keep out that moisture, as opposed to something like condoms or gloves or plastic bags, which just keep the moisture in once it gets in there. So they can be great if you have them really well sealed and keep the moisture out, but if they don't, then you have just provided a swimming pool for your microphone. I've definitely seen a completely sweat-log 5212 because water got into the top of that condom and pooled in there. One way of avoiding that can be some sort of thing like some people use cotton swabs and 2 condoms to sort of keep the stuff from getting into there, but it's all things that would be done better by those neoprene pouches because they have this really nice Velcro that sort of holds snug to the connectors. So I definitely recommend that if you can afford it.
I'll just say that I've never been on a show where we've used condoms or plastic bags on microphones because we've always had like nice mic pouches that kept most of the water away and allowed it to breathe. And I've never had a transmitter fail because it got water on it. So
yeah, I mean they're definitely it's a one-time purchase versus a continual purchase. So definitely keep that in mind. And they also usually fit nicer, especially the commercial made ones, and hold on better. So definitely all to keep in mind. You can see that wireless mic belts now even has this nice little, oh yes, as John W. mentioned, non-lubricated condoms, for sure. And they have this nice little cable management thing, which can be, if you're doing a lot of productions with short runs, a good way to manage that cable on a short period of time as opposed to Hellerman Sleeves. Yeah. All right.
yeah.
So next is sweat got in a mic, how to deal with it. So we refer to that commonly as a sweat out. So that just is when sweat makes it into that microphone capsule and causes the mic to sound like it's underwater because it is. There are some preventative methods that we'll talk about on the next slide. But in terms of how to deal with that, a swipe from a cotton round a lot of times can dry that up. But if you need to, a quick blow from a can of compressed air can clean that out. So as Kevin mentioned, blow it across from the capsule, not from its back. Definitely holding it close and going full blast straight at the element can damage it for sure, because it's just a thin little diaphragm in there making the sound happen. So, or picking up the sound. So definitely keep in mind to use that gently. Also, that these cans of air have a liquid in them that's both cold and often contains a bitterant. So yeah, definitely be careful with that. Always make sure to do a little test blow away from the person, because when the can gets shooken up, they can spray out a little bit of that stuff, and you definitely don't want to be getting that anywhere near an actor's face. I also like
I always shade their eyes,
Yeah,
or
that's about what I was gonna say.
with my hand. Yeah, you gotta watch out, especially for their eyes.
Yeah, so if you're blowing on their forehead, definitely put your hand in front of their eyes. And if you're doing it on their ear, I often use my hand as a little like partition on the sort of side of their face, like this. Blow over there,
Yeah.
or cover their eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But don't blow in that direction.
Yeah. Right. So after multiple sweat outs, this can it can damage a microphone because the sweat and that salt will build up on the diaphragm. So you definitely want to try to minimize sweat outs, which we'll talk about in the next slide. And also a similar cleaning method to what we talked about earlier with makeup. You can often apply similar cleaning methods to the microphones to try and prolong their life after some sweat outs. Yes, as Bill said, they can definitely a non-breathable solution can result in the transmitters overheating, for sure. All right, sweat out prevention. So here we have two methods that a more temporary and a more permanent method for sweat out protection. So the first here is a piece of moleskin wrapped around the element, just cut into a thin strip and wrapped around. So this can be great for a temporary solution, and it can sort of soak up the sweat as it's getting to the element. However, it can get really nasty over time. It'll start to fall off just because it's it's got a temporary adhesive holding it on. So great for, a 1 week run. You'll have to replace it often because it starts to get sort of nasty because it's been soaking up sweat. As opposed to something like this from Kevin's production, thanks to Adriana, which has a nice little gasket, sort of. It's fixed with adhesive onto it, and that's a more permanent solution. However, if you're in a situation where you don't have a microphone element to permanently attach a gasket to, or a cap to permanently attach a gasket to, the moleskin can be a better option. Imagine in this situation, the primary mic has the gasket and the backup doesn't.
Yeah, I think this is Hamilton, a mic that we would use on the actor playing Hamilton, and I don't remember who this is for, but I guess we had an actor who was. I think this is actually from before I was on the production because I don't remember having any Hamiltons with a gasket on it. But also the gasket keeps both mics standing away from the head a little bit. So even the gasket on the primary mic is helping the backup mic a little bit here because it's keeping both of them standing away from the forehead just a little bit.
Yeah, and these gaskets are both on microphones that would be like set up for a forehead mic. You can use this on any microphone position that there is, and a lot of times you'll find, especially on higher end headset microphones like the DPAs, that they'll have a little ring halfway down the boom that's meant to stop that sweat from sliding down the boom. So yeah, definitely all good ways to prevent sweat. All right, so the next is hydrophobic coatings. So one example here is Scotchgard. There's a variety of products meant to help water roll off. So with something that's a spray, it would just be spray onto a container or even onto like one of the cotton swabs and either use a Q-tip or that cotton swab to apply it to the microphone. And this is just going to help water roll off and repel. So, yes.
Yeah, there's also maybe I was commenting on Josh Boatman's comment, but there's also sometimes there's hydrophobic coatings for sunglasses.
Oh,
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but I had an A1 who was really into nice sunglasses, and he always had this hydrophobic coating that he used on nice sunglasses.
Yeah. I've purchased it. I mean, it's purchasable in a lot of different forms. The stuff that they sell as shoe water repellent is also useful for it. So they make it for a lot of different things. I'm specifically interested in that sunglasses one. Because it seems like it would be the most designed to adhere to metal or plastic. So
yeah, I'll see if I can find that, and we'll yeah.
Yeah. All right. So next is we're going to get into some sort of both to help you apply and also just cleaning in general. So the first is alcohol swabs. A lot of people use these to clean off skin before applying a microphone with tape. But they're not really the best, sort of because they just mix with the sweat. Sometimes they can sort of mix and then the alcohol can cause both to evaporate, but they're really not the best and they can dry out your skin. But they are really good for cleaning tape residue off mics, and some people use them for cleaning tape residue off skin. So it's all definitely worth keeping in mind. Yes, Lance, some of them are from my family. Another thing that I actually didn't mention earlier with the pouches that I would like to sort of sidetrack and bring up now is what can happen to a connector if it is exposed to too much sweat. So here you can see a connector. This is a TA4F connector from a SurePack that has sort of gotten waterlogged with sweat. So this sort of external sweat on the outside can be cleaned off, and it's sort of all right. But what you want to watch out for is this is like a marker of sweat making it into other places, like the pins on the inside that can, those can be both corroded by sweat or cause not to make full contact because they're covered in that salt. And that sweat is getting into the microphones. I've opened up a lot of like Sennheiser packs to replace those connectors in the Sennheiser packs that can go bad sometimes, and ended up having to do a complete like cleaning, sometimes like an ultrasonic cleaning of those boards because they just get covered in sweat. So definitely make sure to be protecting your packs and connectors. All right, so next is skin prep. So skin prep is a really great option for keeping or for cleaning skin before applying tape. So it's really great because it's designed to both clean off, and it leaves a little film that both helps the tape stick but also makes it easier to peel off the tape. So you'll find that sometimes when you open these packets, they have this. If you get some of the solution on your hands, you'll find it leaves that film. And it can be a little bit weird when it gets on your hands, but it's definitely great for helping tape stick on. Yeah. And then there's Essiden has a great product that goes with this called Remove, which is actually something that Kevin just told me about and I didn't know existed. So yeah.
Yeah, it's just another option to remove that, because all of this stuff obviously is medical supplies, and especially skin prep and remove. And there's also another thing called Unisolve. It's all sort of aimed at patients who are getting IVs a lot, or otherwise have a lot of taping and removal from their skin. This sort of stuff helps reduce the trauma to their skin. And so it's perfect for our use, even though we're not doing medical work. But that's what all this stuff is. And that's why you find all this stuff at medical suppliers. Smith & Nephew is a medical supply company.
Yeah, and there'll be Amazon links for all this stuff in the description. So yeah, we are at the end of all this. So thank you for bearing with us for 83 whole slides, and we'll answer any questions that are remaining.
Yeah, and I think we've attacked a lot of them. I just asked for if there's any final questions in the chat, but several people have asked if the video is going to be recorded. I assume we'll just be able to leave it up on your channel here, Ryan.
Yeah, so it is. It may end up in a separate post depending on how it works out. But yeah, it will be posted probably within the hour, and we'll have the updated description as well for you guys to use as you choose.